John stood in the still darkness just inside the crumbling great hall of Winterfell, guided by a faint light he could not name. The flicker wasn't torchlight or moonlight or the glow of dawn. It felt older, more ancient, as though it stemmed from some deep root of magic long dormant. He'd been restless the night before, plagued by a vague sense of urgency, finding that his thoughts circled back to the Tower of Joy, time and again. The name had drifted on the edges of his consciousness, as if the haunted castle itself whispered it. Standing there, listening to his own breath echo against cold stone, John felt something calling him. Something irresistible. Something he recognized in his heart before his mind found words. On instinct he followed the light, letting it guide him deeper into Winterfell's hidden passageways and echoing halls. He remembered learning the truth of his birth and how it had upended the foundation of everything he believed. He was not just Ned Stark's bastard. He was Aegon Targaryen, rightful heir to the Iron Throne if the old lines were to be observed. The weight of that lineage pressed upon him like a boulder strapped to his back. John had never wanted power. He'd never dreamed of wearing a crown. All he'd ever wanted was to serve, to keep those he cared for safe, to uphold a code of honor instilled in him by the man he'd once called father. Yet no matter how he tried to push it aside, the truth clung to him. Now that Sam and Bran had uncovered the secret, the realm of possibilities stretched before John in a dizzying array of choices and consequences. In the gloom of Winterfell's deserted corridor, he felt a chill prickle along his arms. The thin shirt he wore did little to protect him from the cold, but he scarcely noticed the physical discomfort. Something more urgent drew his attention. The faint light was shimmering at the far end of the hallway, a ghostly glow that flickered on the ancient stones. For a moment, he wondered if it was the presence of some long-dead Stark ancestor, or if it might be one of the children of the forest, stealthy and silent, guiding him to knowledge beyond mortal comprehension. But the light shape wavered like a living flame, dancing and drawing him forward. He followed, nearly holding his breath. His feet carried him over rough-hewn floors, past battered suits of armor that stood as silent sentinels to ages of war and winter. He glimpsed the wolf sigils carved into pillars, and the scars on the walls from when the Ironborn had once seized Winterfell. Each mark reminded him that this keep was more than stone and mortar. It was a testament to the resilience of the North. But the further he ventured, the more dreamlike it all became. His steps began to feel weightless, as if he were drifting. A hush fell over his ears, muffling the faint sounds of the wind outside. When at last he emerged into a small hidden courtyard, the faint glow shifted into something more vivid. It pulsed like a living heart, beckoning him. John took one cautious step after another, approaching that mesmerizing light. He realized that his heart was pounding, as if he faced an enemy. But there was no threat here. Instead, there was a sense of silent anticipation, like the night before a fateful battle. The glow resolved itself into an archway that seemed to hover in midair, an impossible sight that should not exist in any normal realm. Its edges shimmered in 1,000 tiny motes of blue and silver, swirling around an empty center that promised passage to some other place. He hesitated, every inch of him wanting to be sure of what he was seeing, yet compelled to learn what lay beyond. A memory surfaced in his mind, unbidden. The very moment he had knelt before the heart tree in the Godswood, praying for guidance and receiving only the soft moan of wind through branches. In that memory, he felt the presence of the old gods, ancient watchers with no shape, no voice, but infinite awareness. Here and now, he had the strangest suspicion they were with him again, nudging him forward, whispering to him without words. He wondered if his father, Eddard Stark, had ever felt this uncanny sensation. A feeling that duty and destiny and something inexplicably powerful converged all at once. Jon's hesitation wavered. He took a breath and stepped through the shimmering arch. The air changed the instant he crossed the threshold. Winterfell's chill vanished, replaced by the dry heat of the Dornish sun. The light blinded him momentarily, and he had to lift his hand to shield his eyes. Sand crunched under his boots. Slowly the shapes around him sharpened, tall, weathered stones rising like jagged teeth from the desert floor. Dawn tinted the sky in shimmering pink and gold. He recognized this place from the stories. He had never seen it in waking life, but the name resonated. The Red Mountains of Dorne. A short distance away, an isolated tower stood, half broken, with pale stone walls that reflected the rising sun. A gentle wind carried the scent of dusty rock and far-off blossoms. Somewhere nearby, a horse neighed. Jon's heart lurched in his chest. He knew of the Tower of Joy only from whispered legends, and Mira Reed's recollections, and from Bran's visions. It was here that Eddard Stark and his closest companions had fought the 3 Kingsguard knights who protected his mother, Lyanna Stark. It was here, within those collapsing walls, that she had died giving birth to him. As he approached the tower's entrance, he could hardly believe the place was real. The wind tugged at his cloak. The sun's warmth pressed on him. But the day felt oddly hushed, as if all living creatures held their breath. His legs carried him across the dusty ground, each step a blend of trepidation and determination. The tower was in partial ruin. Vines and dust choked the broken threshold. Inside, long shafts of daylight pierced the gloom through crumbled stone walls, illuminating dust motes that hung in the air. Jon found himself in a main chamber, a space that felt both sacred and haunted. The weight of history, his history, settled upon his shoulders. It was near this spot, or perhaps in an upper chamber that no longer existed, that Lyanna had labored, accompanied by the smell of blood and the anguish of childbirth. He sensed her spirit here, lingering in the silence. He closed his eyes, feeling a profound mix of sorrow and reverence. It was overwhelming to stand where his life had begun, and where his mother's ended. He could almost imagine her voice, gentle and breathless, calling for her beloved brother Ned. And then, like a sudden shift in the wind, Jon perceived he was no longer alone. A presence hovered at the edge of his awareness, a warmth unlike any sunlight, a human presence that carried with it a subdued echo of Targaryen fire. Jon turned, his hand instinctively reaching for the sword at his hip, except he realized a heartbeat later he had no sword. He hadn't been wearing it when he wandered through Winterfell. The figure stood in a ribbon of sunlight, half illuminated, half lost in shadow, clad in armor that was both elegant and worn. The man's features struck Jon immediately. The silvery hair that fell in waves, the curve of his high cheekbones, the solemn cast to his purple eyes. A Targaryen face if ever there was one, yet tempered with a quiet steel. Jon felt his breath catch. The man was neither ghostly nor fully solid. He flickered like an image from a fever dream. Yet the sorrow in his face was painfully real, and the faint aura around him pulsed with remorse and longing. Jon had never seen Rhaegar Targaryen in life. All accounts had told him the man died on the Trident, long before Jon took his first breath. But here he stood, if only in some vision or reflection that had shattered time's boundaries. Jon tried to speak, but words failed him at first. A strange sense of recognition filled him, as though some bond that tied father to son transcended the barrier of death. Rhaegar's gaze rested on him, and he offered a slow, measured nod. For a long moment, neither spoke. Jon found himself unable to look away. He felt uncertain whether he should bow or show some gesture of respect, not because of Rhaegar's princely title, but because he sensed something profound in this fleeting reunion, something that demanded reverence. The hush enveloped them both. Dust drifted through the cracks in the ceiling, painting columns of gold that flickered over Rhaegar's armor. Jon almost reached out a hand, though he wasn't sure whether he was meant to touch a spectral figure. Finally, Jon summoned the courage to break the silence. "Are you truly him?" His voice was soft, echoing against the battered walls. Rhaegar tilted his head slightly, the expression in his eyes shifting from solemn to gentle. He did not speak, but he took a single step forward, arms hanging at his sides, as if he too was uncertain of how to cross the gulf between them. In that moment, Jon felt a swirl of emotions surge within him. He wanted to demand answers. He wanted to shout at this man who had left behind a son never to know his mother or father. He wanted to beg for stories about Lyanna, about the love that had borne him into a world of secrecy and danger. He wanted to ask how it was that Rhaegar had been so sure, so assured in the prophecy that had haunted him. Above all, He wanted to fall to his knees and cry for all the pain that had befallen Westeros in the name of Targaryen ambition. But as he opened his mouth again, he found only a harsh whisper emerged. Rhaegar raised a hand slowly, palm outward, as though beseeching Jon not to speak just yet. There was no threat in his manner. Rather, there was an earnest desire to convey something unspoken. The air seemed to ripple. Jon felt it vibrate through his bones. The dust hanging in the light beams quivered like startled insects. A hush fell, but it was the hush of anticipation. A pause in the tempo of the world. Then, ever so gently, Rhaegar's lips moved. "You have come far," he said, voice resonant as a distant harp, but carrying an underlying sadness. Jon realized, with a jolt, that was the first time he'd ever heard his father's voice, even if this was only an echo or vision. "What you seek here is not only the past, but the truth of your own heart." Jon could only stare, heart pounding. He tried to compose himself. I didn't know I was seeking anything," he managed, voice catching in his throat. "I felt something calling me. Something brought me here." Rhaegar inclined his head. "This place is steeped in blood and in prophecy. It is where I sought to keep your mother safe from the war I feared would engulf us all. I did not do enough." He paused, his eyes shimmering with regret. "I thought I understood the will of the gods. I thought, perhaps, I could shape a better future. But destiny is seldom tamed." Jon fought an impulse to lash out with the bitterness that had brewed in him since learning the truth. How could Rhaegar have left Lyanna hidden away in a lonely tower, with only a few knights for protection? How could he have courted such chaos and left her alone to bear the consequences? Yet the anger simmered beneath a wave of sorrow. Jon's voice shook. "You left her here to die." Rhaegar's gaze wavered, and for a flicker of a moment, the image of the silver-haired prince seemed to dim. "I know," he replied softly, his tone thick with remorse. "I believed that if I ended the war swiftly, she would be safe. I believed that our love would herald the new dawn. But we were fools to think we could outrun the cruelty of men." Jon clenched his fists. His nails bit into his palms, and he welcomed the sting. He had grown accustomed to the burdens of leadership, to making agonizing decisions during times of war and famine. Yet this was personal in a way nothing else had been. "She loved you," Jon said, struggling to keep his voice steady. "I know she did. Everyone thinks you stole her away, but from what I've learned, it wasn't like that." A trace of something close to a smile flickered on Rhaegar's face, though sorrow crushed any true joy. "Yes," he whispered. "She loved me, and I her." It was a quiet defiance against the fate her family had planned for her. But the cost. He let his words hang, and the unspoken weight of all the bloodshed that followed filled the space. "I do not ask for forgiveness from you. I do not deserve it. My choices led to a war that ravaged the realm and destroyed my house. I ask only that you remember she found joy, however brief, in the life we began together." Jon's throat constricted. For all his confusion, for all the heartbreak bound up in his identity, that was the one small comfort. That his mother had loved. That she'd known a measure of happiness before the end. The dryness of the air and the swirl of dust in the tower weighed on his lungs. He almost felt as though he were choking on all the things he couldn't say. But he forced himself to speak again. "What am I meant to do now?" he asked, voice cracked. "I never wanted this. I grew up believing I was a bastard. A snow. Then I swore my life to the Night's Watch. War came. The dead rose. And everything changed. Now I'm told I am your son, with a claim to the Iron Throne I don't want. How can I lead a people who don't even know me? I can barely understand myself." "Mendo." Rhaegar's eyes glistened. "My son," he murmured, taking another step closer, until Jon could see the faint outlines of bloodstains on Rhaegar's battered armor. "Presumably from the Battle of the Trident. You stand at a crossroads. Duty is a heavy chain, but so too is destiny. If I have any counsel to give, it is to listen to your heart, and do not turn away from what is right, no matter how great the sacrifice. You have fought the darkness beyond the wall. You have stood against terrors that would break the will of lesser men. In your veins runs the fire and blood of House Targaryen, but also the steadfast honor of the Starks. You are a union of ice and fire, something greater than either alone. Nesti. Jon inhaled, trying to absorb the swirling chaos inside him. People look to me for answers. They see me as a leader. But I feel I'm stumbling through a fog, blindly trying to do what must be done, just as I always have. Rhaegar gave the faintest nod, reaching out his hand. He did not touch Jon. There was a thin barrier between them, as though their worlds could not fully merge. But the intention was clear. A father reaching to console a son, that is all any leader can do. We guess, and hope, and strive to bear the weight of our mistakes. We cannot predict the shape of the future. We can only push toward what we believe is just, and pay the price if we fail. Know this, the bond between you and your mother's house is as unbreakable as the link of Valyrian steel in a chain. House Stark gave you the virtues of loyalty, courage, and compassion. House Targaryen gave you vision, determination, and the capacity for greatness. Whether you rule, whether you lead armies, or whether you choose a different path, you do so as an heir to both worlds. A hush enveloped the ruined tower again, but it was not oppressive this time. It was solemn, like a vow. Jon let his eyes roam over the space. In the corners, remnants of broken crates, shards of pottery, and old rushes told silent tales of a life never fully lived. Dust-laden sunlight shimmered on the edges of Rhaegar's figure, threatening to dissipate him at any moment. Jon felt an urgency to seize every passing second. I have so many questions, he whispered. Rhaegar's voice gentled. Then ask, if the gods permit it. Jon took a breath. The first question to leap from his heart was also the simplest. Did you truly believe that I was the prince that was promised? The memory of Melisandre's murmured prophecies and Daenerys' glimpses of fate still rattled him. So much hinged upon legends written in shadows. Rhaegar's expression gained a faraway cast, as though recalling an old, once-cherished dream. I believed in prophecy, he said slowly. I believed I had a role to fulfill, that 3 heads of the dragon would be needed to face a great terror. I thought that my line might bring forth a child who could stand against the darkness. But whether that was you or another, or only a metaphor the world tries to shape, I cannot say. My faith was strong, but my understanding was limited. The tapestry of destiny is woven by many hands, not just ours. Perhaps you are, or perhaps another is, or perhaps that prophecy was never as literal as we believe. Jon nodded, eyes stinging. He had come to suspect as much. The world was not so simple that one person could shoulder all burdens. Yet the thought brought him neither joy nor relief, only a subdued acceptance. Another question, older and more personal, burned on his tongue. Would you have acknowledged me if you had lived? For the first time, Rhaegar's solemn facade cracked, and genuine pain showed through. Without hesitation, he replied, voice trembling slightly. You were born in love, not in shame. I would have had your mother crowned my queen, and you would have been a prince of the realm, cherished by your father and all of Westeros. That was my dream. But the realm was not ready for our truths, or for the changes we meant to make. We tried to outrun the shadow of war, and we failed. Jon looked away, blinking rapidly. He thought of the lonely nights in the barracks of Winterfell, the sense of being an outcast at feasts, always a step behind Robb, Sansa, Arya, Bran, and Rickon in the eyes of his father's bannermen. He had loved his siblings, still did fiercely, but there had always been a divide, a whisper that said he did not belong. Hearing Rhaegar's words offered a small balm for the countless doubts that had plagued him all his life, yet it also sharpened the ache of loss. What could have been, had the realm not burned in war? He pressed on, feeling time slipping through his fingers. What about Daenerys, your sister? She's alive. She's fought and bled to claim her birthright. She believes herself the last Targaryen. Now she's learned of me and it's complicated. We are allies, yet there is tension. She sees me as a threat to her crown, though she tries to mask it. Jon paused, the words sticking in his throat. And we care for each other. It felt strange to admit that, even here. But he refused to hide from the truth. But the Targaryen line, the traditions. She wouldn't think it strange to marry within the family. I don't know what to do. I don't know if the realm would accept us together. And now I wonder if we're simply falling into the same illusions that trapped you and my mother. Massilian. Rhaegar's expression shifted into a quiet empathy. Daenerys was only a babe when I died. I remember her as a child of gentle smiles. That the fates have led her on such a harsh road grieves me. She bears a great burden as well. If you hold affection for her, and if she cares for you in return, then know your hearts are free to choose. Yet the realm is not so free. The realm is suspicious of Targaryen rule, after the legacy of my father. They might resist you both. They might fear a union of dragon and wolf. Or they might see in you two a chance for healing. You cannot foresee how people's hearts will turn. But if I have learned anything in death, it is that we must not let fear alone shape our course. Love is precious, more so than crowns and titles. Yet one must also weigh the cost in blood and division. He frowned, gaze downcast. I wish I had a simpler answer. Jon's jaw clenched. He thought about the conflict raging in his mind, and in the realm itself. The great war with the White Walkers had ended, but the scars remained. Now, there was the question of how to rebuild, how to unite, how to ensure that the land would heal. I don't know if I have the strength for more war, he said quietly. I've seen so many die. I've watched my closest friends cut down. If taking the throne would spare lives, I might do it. But I have no desire for the power. Daenerys, she was raised on the idea that the Iron Throne is her rightful seat. I cannot simply ask her to step aside. Rhaegar sighed, the sound carrying centuries of heartbreak. Power in Westeros has always been a tempest. Even if you have no appetite for it, it may claim you. If you turn away, others will step forward. Some good, some cruel. The question is whether you can stand aside and still protect those you love. That is the choice I faced in my youth. I believed that by taking the crown from my father, I might save the kingdom from his madness. In the end, Jon listened, recalling the stories of Aerys II Targaryen, the Mad King, who had burned his enemies alive. The swirl of memory and vision made him dizzy. The air in the tower crackled with tension, as if the world itself was holding them in a dream bubble that might burst at any moment. He glanced around, noting how the stones seemed to shimmer, as if in a heat haze. He realized with a pang that his time here might be short. There's more, Jon said, swallowing hard. I've pledged myself to protecting the North. Winterfell, it's more home to me than any place in this realm. If I sit the Iron Throne, I fear I'll lose that bond. The North is not quick to bend the knee, especially to a Targaryen. But they know me as Ned Stark's son. He paused, conflicting loyalties tearing at him. You are of the North in heart and spirit, Rhaegar replied softly. That is a strength, not a weakness. The realm needs all its corners recognized. Too often the crown forgets the vast distance between King's Landing and the Wall. If you must lead, then lead in a way that honors both your heritages. Remind them that the dragon has always needed the wisdom of the wolf, and the wolf has benefited from the might of the dragon. You stand at a unique juncture, my son. Use that to unite, not to divide. But be wary. Forces in this land will conspire. You will be tested beyond measure. Only your heart can guide you when reason fails. Nor. Jon felt the press of tears again, though he blinked them away. In another world, perhaps he could have been raised at Rhaegar's side, taught by him, grown to know him beyond the tangled myth. Now, he had but a few ephemeral moments of a vision. He let out a shaky breath and dared one final question. Do you regret it? He asked, his voice quiet as a sigh. Loving my mother, setting everything in motion. Would you change it if you could? Nain. Rhaegar's gaze lifted toward the fractured ceiling, where shards of sky blazed with morning light. The edges of his figure were starting to fade, the shimmer around him becoming more pronounced. I regret the war. The bloodshed, the sorrow, he said, voice soft. I regret not being there for your mother at her end. And more than anything, I regret never knowing you. But I do not regret loving her. For you were born of that love. And that is something no war or tragedy can erase. You are proof that even in the darkest of times, hope can burn bright. Menshikaweo. John's eyes stung, and he nodded, words lost. The tower felt alive with whispered echoes, as though the ghosts of all that transpired watched them. The sunlight intensified, and John heard a faint rushing sound in his ears, like wind tearing through a narrow pass. The ground quivered beneath his feet. He knew their meeting was ending, that this precious glimpse of Rhaegar, his father, was slipping away. Rhaegar's form began to flicker. He raised a hand again, in farewell. Remember who you are, he said, his voice echoing through the dusty walls. You are the song of ice and fire made flesh. Seek the path that spares the realm if you can. Protect what you love. Let your mother's courage and my mistakes guide you to a better fate. Know that my love goes with you, though I am but a shadow of memory. Tears threatened John's vision, but he forced himself to meet Rhaegar's eyes. I'll try, he managed, his voice a trembling promise. I'll try to do what's right. He wanted to say so much more. He wanted to ask for guidance, to reach out and embrace the father he never knew. But even as he stepped forward, the air shimmered, and a blast of heated wind swept through the tower. He shut his eyes against the sudden glare. When he opened them, he stood alone. The chamber felt silent, the dust still and lifeless. The sense of presence and magic had vanished as though it had never been. He took a moment to steady his breath. The wave of loss that struck him was almost unbearable. For a scant few minutes, he had glimpsed a man of prophecy, a man whose decisions had shaped Jon's entire life. He wanted to believe it was more than a dream. He felt a warmth at his core that told him it was real, that Rhaegar had indeed spoken to him, given him comfort and counsel. Glancing around, he noticed the shadows in the tower were no longer tinted pink by dawn. The day had progressed, the sun higher in the sky, the heat more intense. John turned back to the doorway, stepping out into the bright Dornish sun. He raised an arm to shield his eyes, letting them adjust. The landscape was stark, pale sand, a few sparse bushes, and the jagged peaks in the distance. He saw no sign of horses or men. It was as though he alone had been dropped into a memory. Any moment now, he suspected, the vision might end, and he would return to Winterfell. Yet as he stood in the doorway, the sun scorching his skin, he realized the portal that had brought him here was no longer visible. Was he meant to simply wait? Would the magic swirl him away again when it chose? He walked a few steps around the circumference of the tower's exterior, searching for any sign of how he might leave. He felt an echo in the air, a faint sense of the magical current that had first drawn him in, but it was weaker now, less defined. Kneeling, he scooped up a handful of the sandy soil. The grains spilled through his fingers, carried by a light breeze. It all felt real. He wondered if he could survive out here if the vision's gateway didn't reappear. Uncertainty churned in his stomach. Yet he recalled Rhaegar's parting words. You are the song of ice and fire made flesh. Protect what you love. Even if he was trapped in this echo of the past, he had to hold on to that directive. A sudden swirl of wind kicked up dust around him, forcing him to cover his mouth and nose. When he lowered his arm, he beheld a shimmering distortion in the air a few yards from the tower's base. It bent the light, forming a half circle, barely perceptible, like heat waves rising from sun-scorched rocks. John recognized the phenomenon. It was another portal, or perhaps the same, remanifested. Heart-pounding, he approached it, a part of him afraid to cross, yet more afraid to remain and fade away in this lonely memory. He inhaled and stepped forward. The air felt hot, then cold, and then Winterfell's familiar chill embraced him. His lungs constricted, and he stumbled into the hidden courtyard from which he had first departed. The weathered stones and the biting cold of the north rushed back into his senses. Gasping, he looked around, disoriented. He saw no swirling lights now, no mysterious archway. The courtyard walls loomed quietly, and the wind carried the icy tang of winter. He was home. For a heartbeat, Jon wondered if he had dreamed it all, if exhaustion and the burdens he carried had manifested an elaborate hallucination. But he felt the grit of Dornish sand caked in the seams of his boots. In his right hand, he still clutched a small, battered amulet he had unknowingly picked up from the tower's floor, a pendant showing a three-headed dragon, chipped and smeared with old stains. It must have fallen from Rhaegar's gear, or perhaps it was something left behind by the Kingsguard who guarded Lyanna. Regardless, its presence now was proof enough that the vision was real. He closed his eyes, letting himself recall his father's face, Rhaegar's face, the sorrow in those violet eyes, the faint quiver in his voice, the love he had spoken of so tenderly. Jon's chest felt tight as he realized how much that short encounter had given him. Rhaegar was not the gleaming saint some had portrayed him to be, nor was he the monstrous villain others claimed. He was a man, flawed and earnest, who had tried to do what he thought was best and paid a grievous price. Jon found a measure of release in understanding that, and with that acceptance came a strange peace. He stood there for a long time, silent, until the cold of Winterfell penetrated and he let out a long breath. He needed to return to the Great Hall, to continue the tasks of running a fractured kingdom. There were lords to consult, ravens to be sent, alliances to be managed. He was still torn between the North and the Targaryen claim, still uncertain how to proceed with Daenerys or with the realm at large. But a small part of him felt stronger now, more anchored. He no longer had to fight the question of why Rhaegar had abandoned him. He understood the complexities behind that tragedy, and perhaps that would help him shape his own fate. As he made his way through Winterfell's winding corridors, he thought of telling someone about the vision. Perhaps Sam or Bran could shed further insight on the magic that had facilitated it. But a greater part of him wanted to keep it private for a little while, to hold that gentle, painful memory close to his chest. He had so few memories of his parents. Eddard Stark was the father who raised him, but Rhaegar Targaryen was the father by blood, whose silent lullabies had echoed through the realm before Jon was born. Now at least, Jon had a sense of both men and the different ways they had shaped him. By the time he reached his chambers, dawn was breaking over the north. Gray light filled the sky, and a hush lay over the castle grounds. The new day's duties would soon begin. He could hear faint stirrings of servants and guards preparing for the morning. Jon entered his room, sank onto a wooden chair, and turned the amulet over in his hands. The three-headed dragon glinted in the meager light, though tarnish and dents marred its once fine craftsmanship. Carefully, he tucked it away in a drawer, unsure what significance it might hold, but unwilling to cast it aside. He leaned back, mind racing, exhaustion heavy on his limbs. If Rhaegar's words meant anything, they meant that Jon was free to shape his own path. But that path was lined with responsibilities he could not ignore. He thought of Sansa, of Arya and Bran, of the people of the North who had proclaimed him king in the North before he even understood the weight of that crown. He thought of Tyrion and Daenerys, the alliances they had struggled to forge, the brittle trust that threatened to crumble under the revelation of his parentage. He thought of the realm that needed peace and unity more than ever before. How to reconcile all these truths was beyond him in that moment. But as the first pale beams of morning light slanted through his window, he remembered Rhaegar's final words of guidance. Unite, protect, love, do what is right. They were simple words, yet they formed a potent creed. Jon vowed to keep them close, to let them guide him even when the path was darkest. For now, that was enough. He sat there for long minutes, eyes closed, listening to the quiet hum of Winterfell. His mind roamed over the shape of his future, the obstacles and possibilities entwined in each choice. He thought of the silver-haired father who had appeared to him, not as a regal phantom demanding obedience, but as a penitent spirit seeking forgiveness. He thought of the mother he never knew, who had loved fiercely enough to defy her family's expectations, only to be claimed by fate's cruelty. And he thought of himself, a man straddling two worlds, uncertain of which heritage to claim. A slow determination settled in his chest, and he allowed himself a moment of stillness. He would find a way to honor both sides of his legacy without sacrificing who he truly was. Even if it meant forging a new path, foreign to both Starks and Targaryens, he would do it. He had led the Night's Watch against the Wildlings, and then united them against the White Walkers. He had been named king in the north, and found a way to ally with Daenerys Targaryen, bridging the gap between dragon and wolf. He had been resurrected by the Lord of Light for a purpose he still did not fully understand, but he would not squander that second chance. When he finally rose from the chair, he felt the strain of the ordeal. His legs ached, his mind felt raw, but in that fatigue, he also sensed an ember of resolve. The corridors outside his chamber were beginning to fill with bustling servants. He nodded to them as they passed, their cloaks sweeping over stone floors. They would see him as they always had, their lord, their protector. None of them would suspect that he had journeyed back to the Tower of Joy in a vision, or that he had faced the father he never knew. That secret felt heavy yet sacred, a story that belonged to him alone. He walked on, making for the council chamber, where Sansa and the others would gather soon. His footsteps echoed with a rhythm of their own, like the beating of a heart. Memories of the vision played behind his eyes, Rhaegar's armor stained with blood, the fierce sadness in his gaze, the swirl of magic in the tower's dust-ridden air. It all felt more real to him than any prophecy recited in a maester's tome. It was a living moment, a chance he'd been granted to connect with what he had lost. And in that fleeting, wondrous meeting, he had gleaned a sense of courage to face what lay ahead. In the days to come, he would grapple with lords and ladies questioning the legitimacy of his claim. He would speak with Daenerys about how to move forward without tearing the realm apart. He would seek counsel from Tyrion, from Sam, from Davos, from all those he trusted, and he would remember the man who once took up a harp in secret, who yearned to bring a better future into the world, and who, for a moment, had spoken to his son through the veil of time and death. Though he did not have all the answers, Jon Snow, Aegon Targaryen, stepped into the council chamber with head held high. He would listen, he would learn. He would make the difficult choices that only he could make. No crown or prophecy would define him. He carried the lessons of two fathers, two worlds, two destinies within him. And in the silence of his heart, he carried the memory of a father's final plea. To cherish love over fear, to unite instead of divide, and to protect all that was precious, no matter the cost. With that solemn promise burning within him, Jon felt more prepared than ever to face the uncertain roads ahead. Jon studied the war table, running his hand over the map's faded parchment, eyes lingering on the boundaries between the Crownlands, the Reach, and the North. Dozens of carved wooden figures, wolves, lions, stags, dragons, occupied various points across the Seven Kingdoms. Some signified the location of allied forces, others enemy movements. Still others stood for the uncertain loyalties of houses that might yet shift in the wake of the Great War. Sansa stood at his side, her face a portrait of cool composure, though he felt the subtle tension emanating from her. Beyond her, Davos hovered in a thoughtful stance, while Bran sat in his wheeled chair in a shadowed corner, quiet but keenly attentive. Arya was absent, out drilling with the men, or perhaps scouting the grounds. Jon could never quite track her movements these days. The fire in the hearth crackled gently, its warmth a welcome reprieve against the chill that permeated Winterfell's stone walls. Outside, the sky had fully brightened, but the wind howled across the battlements, a lingering reminder that winter had barely begun to relax its grip on the north. Jon could hear the muffled clamor of the courtyard, guards changing shifts, stable boys tending to horses, the soft hum of daily life. Yet within the council chamber, there was a hush of expectation that pressed on everyone. Sansa broke the silence first. "Lord Glover's men returned from Deepwood Motte last night," she said, voice hushed so as not to carry beyond these walls. "They confirm that some lords are uneasy about the rumors circulating. They've heard suggestions. That you might not be Ned Stark's son. Her gaze flicked toward Jon, and the set of her lips betrayed her discomfort. They want reassurance or answers. Jon stood upright, trying to quell the weary anxiety stirring in his gut. I expected as much, he said. We can't keep rumors from spreading. The truth is out, or nearly so. He caught Sansa's eye, forcing a steadiness into his tone. Has anyone spoken openly against me? Sansa shook her head, red hair brushing against the fur at her shoulders. Not yet. But we can sense the tension. The North stands behind you, but they've always been wary of Targaryens. The secret of your birth might be perceived as a betrayal, even if you never intended it. That don't you? Davos cleared his throat. But they know you. You led them to victory against the Boltons. You stood against the Night King. You saved us all from a threat we scarcely believed in until it stood at our gates. That should count for something, even if the truth of your heritage unsettles them. Jon let out a breath, glancing at Bran. His brother had uncovered the truth in one of his visions, had recounted Lyanna Stark's last moments, had borne witness to the secret marriage of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Dut. The weight of it pressed upon them all, but especially upon Jon, who felt torn between the father who raised him and the father he'd never known. The latter had appeared to him in that dreamlike vision at the Tower of Joy, leaving him with more clarity, but also deeper questions. Bran's voice came softly from the corner. The truth was never going to remain hidden. Father. He hesitated, catching himself. Ned Stark did all he could to protect you from Robert's wrath. Now there is no Robert. But suspicion and fear still shape people's minds. He blinked those ancient-seeming eyes. They will want to see how you handle it. Perhaps they will wait for your word before deciding whether to love you or hate you. Sansa folded her arms, expression guarded. The lords demand an audience. They want to hear from you directly. They likely expect a denial, or at least an explanation that reaffirms your commitment to the North. Jon nodded, feeling the press of time. Summon them, he said. We'll speak in the main hall after the midday meal. Let the rumor be addressed head-on. I've never been good at politics, but I won't hide from the truth, nor from them. He glanced at Davos. Will you stand with me? Davos offered a nod, his grizzled features set in determination. Always, my lord. The council lingered a moment longer, as if uncertain how to proceed. Finally, Jon looked again at the map, eyes sweeping over the intricately drawn mountains and rivers. There were so many concerns pressing in. The rebuilding of the North, the fortification of the lands now ravaged by White Walkers, the uneasy alliance with Daenerys Targaryen's forces stationed in the south. But first, he had to address his people. Sansa stepped away from the table, promising to send the ravens at once. Davos clasped Jon's shoulder and followed her, leaving only Bran with him in the flickering hush. Jon exhaled, turning to his brother. Bran, do you think I'm doing the right thing? Confronting this truth so directly? Bran's gaze was steady, almost too perceptive for a boy of his years. The truth is the truth. If you do not speak it, others will speak for you. Better it come from your lips. He paused, letting the words settle. Fear and anger thrive in shadows. You can show them there is no monster hidden in the dark, just a man who has sacrificed himself for them time and time again. Jon gave a faint smile. I hope you're right. Bran bowed his head slightly, and then, without another word, he turned his chair around and wheeled out of the chamber. Jon listened to the diminishing sound of Bran's wheels on the stone until it vanished, leaving him alone with the crackle of the fire and the silent weight of his thoughts. He rested his palms on the edge of the map table, letting his gaze blur until the lines on the parchment became meaningless shapes. For a moment, he let himself recall the Tower of Joy, the dusty air, Rhaegar's sorrowful eyes. He wanted to believe that his father's words had been more than a fevered dream, that they had truly been a gift of guidance. He closed his eyes, drawing a deep breath of the cool air. The question that gnawed at him was one Rhaegar had posed as well. Could he stand aside from the crown he never desired, even if it risked plunging the realm into further strife? Or would claiming that crown save lives? Sansa had urged him that the realm needed a stable ruler, that Daenerys, while strong and courageous, had not yet earned the trust of the Northerners, nor of all the lords who once served the Baratheons or Lannisters. Yet Jon himself yearned only to do his duty, to keep the peace, to ensure the sacrifices of the war against the dead were not wasted. He rubbed his temples, feeling a headache forming. Duty clashed with his instincts, tearing him between two worlds. At length, he pushed away from the table. He needed fresh air, perhaps a moment at the battlements to clear his mind before the gathering. Stepping into the corridor, he nodded to guards who snapped to attention. Their eyes flicked to him with respect, but also with a hint of curiosity. Perhaps the rumors were already swirling among the ranks. He tried to keep his shoulders square, posture confident. It wouldn't do to show them any doubt. He strode past a line of narrow windows overlooking Winterfell's courtyard. The sky outside was a pale gray, the sun hidden behind low clouds that threatened to dust the land with fresh snow. He caught sight of Arya practicing with a few loyal men, moving in graceful arcs with needle in hand. She danced like water, a lethal fluidity that set her apart. He almost smiled, proud of her growth, then continued on to the outer ramparts. There, the wind assaulted him, tugging at his cloak and sending a chill through his bones. He leaned over the crenellations, gazing at the north's expanse, rolling white fields, dark forests, the faraway shapes of lonely hills. He remembered standing on the wall, seeing the unending wilderness beyond, and feeling that same sense of humility in the face of nature's enormity. Now, the looming threat that had come from that wilderness was gone. But other threats, more human and equally perilous, remained. A soft footstep behind him drew his attention. Turning, he saw Daenerys. She wore a white, fur-lined cloak over her travel leathers, her silver gold hair braided intricately. Her expression was guarded, her violet eyes flicking to him with a mix of caution and something else, affection or longing, or perhaps regret. They had not spoken intimately since the great battle ended, since the truth of Jon's lineage became known. The closeness they once shared had frayed, overshadowed by claims of rightful rule and the confusion of their blood ties. He inclined his head respectfully. "Your Grace," he said. The words came out stiffer than he intended. A slight furrow appeared between her brows. "Must we be so formal?" she asked quietly. "We faced death together. I thought we might have moved beyond titles." Jon hesitated, searching her face. "I'm sorry," he said, voice low. "The day weighs on me. I don't mean to be distant." Daenerys drew closer, glancing at the guards posted a respectful distance away. Her breath hung in small clouds before her lips. "We have both carried burdens that few can understand," she said. "I came here to ask if you need my support when you address your lords. Tyrion says they might resent me if I stand beside you. But I do not want you to feel alone." The old ache rose inside him. He recalled her unwavering courage, how she had flown her dragons north to aid in the war against the dead without hesitation. Yet he also remembered the flicker of anger and betrayal in her eyes when she learned of his parentage and how it might threaten her own claim to the throne. It pained him, but the wedge was there all the same. "I think it's best if I speak to them first," he answered gently. They might fear you, or see you as an outsider interfering in northern affairs. Let me reassure them. Afterward, we can discuss how to unify our forces. They need to know we stand together, but if we show them too strong a front, they might fear we mean to subdue them." She lowered her gaze, as though wounded by the truth of his words. "I understand. The North is proud. I only want them to trust me." Then her eyes rose again. "I want you to trust me too. I know we." She trailed off, voice thick with unspoken conflict. Jon felt his throat constrict. Their situation was beyond complicated. Part of him yearned to gather her in his arms, to recall the closeness they'd shared. Another part recoiled from the truth of their kinship, the taboo that overshadowed Targaryen marriages in the eyes of the northern lords. Still, another part of him felt a deep admiration for her strength, for the empathy she'd shown the oppressed in Essos. "I do trust you," he managed. "It's not a matter of trust. It's More complicated. She nodded, a sadness flickering over her features. I know, she murmured. We both bear names that carry too much weight. But I'll do whatever I can to help you keep the North, if that's what you choose. Whether you rule here or in King's Landing, you won't be alone in it. Remember that. They know him. Her words sparked a thought that had haunted him in the quiet hours of night. What if the best thing for the realm is not a single ruler on the Iron Throne? He ventured softly. What if the 7 kingdoms need more autonomy? An end to the old ways of kings and queens vying for absolute power. It was a radical notion, one he barely dared to consider. But it had come to him when he contemplated all the bloodshed sparked by claims to the throne. Daenerys' brow creased. We came together to defeat the Night King. To unite all men under a common cause, she said. When that cause was gone, we still had the question of how to stop the lords and ladies from tearing each other apart. One realm, one throne. It's how I've always seen the future. But your vision differs. She searched his face. We'll need to decide soon enough what we stand for. The realm can't linger in uncertainty forever. Jon offered a sober nod. One battle ends, another begins. I don't have answers yet. The wind gusted, pushing at them, and the watchmen shuffled their feet. For now, I have to reassure the North that I remain loyal, Targaryen blood or no. She studied him for a heartbeat longer, then touched his gloved hand lightly, a hesitant gesture of closeness. He allowed it, feeling the warmth of her presence even through the layers of cloth. Their eyes met, full of longing and regret for what might have been simpler in another life. Then she slipped away, turning toward the stairs that led down from the ramparts. He watched her descend, her white cloak billowing like a phantom. Left alone, he lingered for a few minutes more in the biting wind, gathering his thoughts. Below, he could see men preparing the Great Hall for the midday address. Torches were being lit, benches aligned, banners adjusted. He steeled himself. If the lords wanted the truth, he would give it to them. The question was whether they would still proclaim him king in the North, or if they would turn away in fear that he was, in fact, the rightful heir to House Targaryen's Old Dominion. When the time came, the hall was packed. The hush of anticipation weighed upon the crowd as Jon stepped up onto the small dais at the front. Davos flanking his right, Sansa and Arya his left, with Bran close by. Ghost prowled at the edges, silent and watchful. A canine shadow that seemed to sense his master's tension. The lords of the North were there. Lord Glover, Lord Manderley, Lady Mormont's cousin, now holding Bear Island. A few minor bannermen who had pledged their men in the last war. Their faces ranged from anxious to curious to defiant. Jon felt his pulse thrum in his ears. The gaze of 100 men and women fell upon him, expecting an explanation. A declaration, perhaps a denial. Instead, he let the silence linger, meeting their eyes one by one, recalling the times he'd fought side by side with them against Ramsay Bolton, or marched with them against the Night King. Sansa stood tall, regal, the Lady of Winterfell. She offered him a slight nod to begin. He drew a breath. My lords, my ladies, you've heard rumors that I am not as I have always claimed to be, a bastard son of Ned Stark, a Snow. You have heard that I might possess Targaryen blood. He paused, the shuffle of feet the only sound in the hall. The rumors are true. A muted ripple ran through the listeners. A few cried out in surprise or confusion. Lord Glover's eyes widened, while another lord pressed his lips into a thin line. Sansa's face remained impassive, a living mask of calm. Arya let her hand rest on the hilt of needle, a subtle posture of warning should anyone move against Jon. Don continued, voice steady despite the hammering of his heart. I was born of Lyanna Stark and Rhaegar Targaryen, lawfully wed in a secret ceremony. To protect me from Robert Baratheon's wrath, Ned Stark claimed me as his bastard. He sacrificed his honor so that I would live, and for that I will forever be in his debt. He is the father who raised me, who taught me what it means to be an honorable man. That I am also a Targaryen by blood does not diminish. More whispers and murmurs swept through the hall. Jon let them stir, understanding that every word needed time to sink in. Then he raised his hand, calling for silence. I did not seek a crown. You named me king in the north, and I accepted the burden to protect you, to unite us against the threat beyond the wall. That threat is gone now, and in the aftermath, we face the age-old question of who will rule. Some say my claim to the Iron Throne is stronger than Daenerys Targaryen's. Others say a Targaryen has no place in the north. I will say this plainly. I have no desire to sit the Iron Throne. I never have. A palpable tension eased in the crowd, though a few lords narrowed their eyes, uncertain whether to believe him. Some of you might question my loyalty to the north. Jon continued. But remember, I have bled for you. I have died for you. And in turn you fought and sacrificed for me. That bond transcends bloodlines. If we are to keep the peace and rebuild our lands, we must stand together. He paused, letting the hush reign again before pressing on. I have given my word to Daenerys Targaryen. She is my ally in rebuilding this realm. Her armies helped us defeat the dead, and her dragons fought our enemies. I know many of you fear her heritage, but she has shown me that she wants what's best for the common people. If you will trust me, you will see that I have not forgotten my duty to you. Together, we can shape a future, free of the wars that have consumed our houses for generations. At that, a voice called from the crowd. Lord Glover, bristling in his heavy fur cloak. And if she decides the North should bend the knee again, after all the independence we fought for, will you stand aside and let her claim us as she pleases? Jon straightened, meeting Glover's challenging stare. The North will remain the North, he said firmly. I will not betray our people's hard-won unity. Daenerys has promised she will not subjugate those who stand with her willingly. If she breaks that promise, I will be the first to stand against her, Targaryen blood or no. My loyalty is to the people who fought beside me, lived beside me, my family. And you all are my family now. And you all are my family now. A murmured mixture of acceptance and hesitation swept the hall. Jon could sense that his declaration had touched some hearts, perhaps not others. Another bannerman, the new head of House Serwyn, raised his voice. We named you king in the north because we trusted you, bastard or not. But now you are not a bastard. You're the blood of old Targaryen kings. How can we be sure you won't put their legacy before ours? Jon's gaze swept the room, resting on the familiar faces of men and women he had grown to respect. You can never be absolutely sure of anyone, he replied quietly. But remember, Targaryen or Stark, I'm still Jon, raised in these halls, shaped by northern values. My loyalty is here. If my birth might help us end the cycle of war, so be it. If the realm demands a Targaryen on the Iron Throne, let Daenerys be that Targaryen. I will not press a claim that was never my choice to begin with. Another wave of conversation rippled through the crowd, uncertain but not hostile. Sansa took a small step forward, sweeping her gaze over the lords and ladies. We have fought alongside Jon for years now, she said. We have seen the measure of his character. Whatever his blood, he has proven his loyalty. I believe in him, and I ask you all to do the same. Will you allow him to guide the North in the days to come? Not for me. The hall fell into a thoughtful hush. Jon listened to his own heartbeat, realizing that this moment might define whether or not the North would remain united. He caught sight of Davos at his flank, the older man's face set with unwavering support. Arya stood unblinking, a subtle hint of fierce protection in her stance. Bran, impassive and otherworldly, watched with an unreadable calm. At last, Lord Manderley, a man of formidable girth and booming voice, let out a heavy sigh. We have seen what war does to this land, he pronounced. Jon Snow, Aegon Targaryen, whoever he may be, is the man who led us to survive the long night. I, for one, will not forget that. My swords remain at his side. Some others echoed the sentiment, nodding or voicing agreement. Lord Glover and a few skeptics exchanged glances, clearly reluctant but swayed by the tide of consensus. Slowly, they too gave curt nods. A fragile acceptance, perhaps. but acceptance nonetheless. Jon felt a cautious relief course through him. This was not a rousing cheer of unwavering allegiance, but it was a foundation upon which to build. He inclined his head to them in gratitude. "Thank you. I won't fail you. We'll keep our kingdom safe and strong, and we will not allow old grudges to shatter the unity we've built." Then, lowering his voice slightly, he added, "And should the day come that a king or queen from the south tries to rule us unfairly, they will face all of us." With that, the gathered lords and ladies began to disperse, some moving to speak among themselves, others bowing or offering formal courtesies to Jon. The tension in the air eased a fraction, though Jon sensed that the threads holding these alliances together were still delicate. Sansa exhaled, releasing the breath she'd been holding, and gave him a small smile. "That went better than I feared," she admitted. Davos nodded. I was half expecting a few to storm out in protest, but they remember who you are, Jon. The hero who saved them from the dead, not the phantom Targaryen conqueror they feared." Jon gripped Davos' arm, gratitude welling up inside him. "Thank you for your counsel." His gaze shifted to Arya, who stood at the dais edge, scanning the crowd with a watchful calm. He saw in her a reflection of the unstoppable will she'd carried through everything she'd endured. As the hall emptied, only a few figures remained. Bran as silent as a statue, Arya stiff and prepared, Sansa her eyes bright with relief, and Tyrion Lannister, who slipped quietly from the margins to approach. Tyrion offered a measured bow to Jon. "A good speech," he quipped. "Honest, direct. It may not quell all doubts, but it sets a tone, more than most kings can manage with a dozen honeyed phrases." Jon let out a weary breath. Honesty might not mend the realm overnight, but at least it leaves no room for the seeds of suspicion to grow in the dark. "Speaking of which, will Daenerys accept my stance, that I don't intend to press a claim?" Tyrion pursed his lips. "She's always known you weren't seeking the throne. She believes in her right, and she'll continue to fight for it, but she also understands the North is different. The question is whether others beyond the North accept her as queen, if they discover you have a stronger claim by law." Jon's stomach twisted. "I can't stop them from talking, from challenging her, but I won't lead them against her, either." Tyrion nodded, his face pinched with calculation. "We'll need to navigate carefully. Cersei has been ousted from King's Landing, and a new council has taken shape, but pockets of Lannister loyalists still lurk about, as do some Baratheon supporters in the Stormlands. They might rally behind a new claimant if they sense weakness, and rumor will eventually reach them that Rhaegar Targaryen's son lives." Sansa's brows drew together. "Let them talk. The North stands behind Jon. If the Southern Lords want another war, they'll find themselves standing alone." She turned to Jon, that protective fire in her eyes. "But there's something else we need to consider. Alliances. We can't close ourselves off from the rest of the realm, not now. We need trade, stable roads, a strong economy to rebuild after the devastation." Tyrion's wry smile returned. "Indeed. And that is where Daenerys, or you, or both, could make a difference. If the realm sees cooperation between the Targaryen queen and the king in the north, it might calm tensions. People will think, if even the proud north bends a little, perhaps we should as well." "Nardell." Jon glanced at Sansa, and realized she was studying him carefully. She was wise enough to see the complexities in uniting the realm under two would-be monarchs, especially when one was an official queen, and the other was a king in name alone, reluctant to take any further crown. But for the moment, the best course might be to maintain a semblance of unity. "We'll host Daenerys and her advisors here for a while longer," Jon said. "We can work out the details of how best to present a united front. Once the realm knows we're not at each other's throats, perhaps cooler heads will prevail." "Yes." Tyrion dipped his head. A promising first step. He cast a glance at Sansa, and a flash of mutual respect passed between them. A respect tempered by their complicated past, but growing nonetheless. Then Tyrion's gaze landed on Bran, who had not spoken once throughout the entire discussion. "My lord," Tyrion offered, "any insight from you? Is there anything we should be wary of?" Bran blinked, distant and mysterious. "The future is not set, But the realm has been battered by forces beyond mortal comprehension. Now men squabble again over lines on a map." He paused, eyes flicking to Jon with an almost ethereal calm. "Do what you can to hold it together. A broken realm will only invite fresh darkness someday. Peace is not permanent, but it can be nurtured." Though Bran's words carried an unsettling weight, Jon found himself strangely comforted. The conversation drifted after that, details of supply lines and rebuilding efforts punctuating their discussion. Sansa and Tyrion spoke of forging new trade routes with the Vale and the Riverlands. Davos mentioned the need to repair roads leading from the Neck to Winterfell, to ensure that caravans bearing much-needed goods could travel unimpeded. Eventually, they dispersed, each burdened by new tasks. Jon lingered in the hall only long enough to watch Tyrion leave through the massive doors. He caught glimpses of servants hurrying to clear away benches, to clean up the leftover scraps of the midday meal, the clink and clatter of plates echoing off the high ceilings. A few of the northern lords had stuck around to speak with Davos or Sansa, each with new concerns or requests. Ghost padded up to Jon, nuzzling his side, as if to remind him that not all was chaos. Jon knelt to scratch the direwolf behind the ears, murmuring soft words of reassurance. He rose and made for the corridor that would take him back to his private chambers, aware of how drained he felt. On the way, he passed a window slit framing the courtyard. The weather had turned colder, and an icy drizzle was falling, turning the courtyard stones slick. Soldiers huddled near braziers, and the stable boys scurried to keep the horses warm. The north in winter was no place for the faint of heart. His thoughts drifted to the Tower of Joy again, to that searing Dornish sun and the sand under his boots. If ever there was a place that felt the opposite of Winterfell, it was that lonely ruin. Yet, it was the root of his life's greatest mystery. The memory of Rhaegar's parting words shimmered in Jon's mind: "Protect what you love." He wondered if his father's spirit had truly believed that love could bridge the chasms dividing men. Rhaegar had tried, and the realm had been plunged into war. Now it was Jon's turn, with different circumstances and the same burden of prophecy. He reached his chamber and slipped inside, bolting the door behind him. The room was cold, the fire in the hearth reduced to embers, so he knelt to stir it back to life, placing fresh logs and coaxing sparks into flames. In the flickering glow, he noticed again the battered amulet head brought back from that vision, resting on a small table by his bed. The three-headed dragon insignia, chipped and tarnished, reflected dimly in the firelight. A wave of emotion coursed through him: regret, hope, longing. He slid the amulet into his palm, recalling the words that had passed between father and son. A soft knock on his door pulled him from the reverie. Jon rose and opened it, surprised to find Arya standing there, half hidden in the shadows of the corridor. She was without her cloak, seemingly unbothered by the chill. "Arya," he greeted, stepping aside to let her enter. She slipped into the room, eyes scanning it, as if to ensure they were alone. "You did well out there," she said. "You spoke plainly. That's what the North respects." And he studied her face. She had changed so much since their childhood, carrying a quiet deadliness tempered by a fierce loyalty. Yet around him, there were still traces of the sister he remembered, the one who'd once insisted on holding a sword instead of a sewing needle. "Thank you," he replied. "Coming from you, that means a great deal." Arya glanced at the amulet in his hand, curiosity gleaming in her eyes. "What's that?" she asked. He hesitated, turning it over carefully. "A relic," he said softly. "Something from my father, Rhaegar Targaryen, not Ned." He hesitated, emotions raw. "I haven't told anyone else about it." Arya's expression shifted slightly. She understood secrets. She had lived among them, thrived on them, in her own way. "May I see it?" she asked, voice cautious. Jon handed it to her. She examined the dragon sigil, tracing the edges with her fingertips. "Looks old," she remarked. "Why keep it?" He let out a slow breath. "Because it reminds me that Rhaegar was real, that I'm not just living someone else's lie. I had a vision of him at the Tower of Joy. He spoke to me, explained why he did what he did, apologized for leaving Lyanna and unleashing so much chaos. I don't know if it was truly him, or some sorcery, or just my own mind, but it felt real. Niam? Arya's brows rose. You didn't tell anyone else? He shook his head. I'm not even sure I believe it myself, but it gave me some clarity I needed. And it gave me that amulet. She handed the pendant back to him, her touch light and careful. We all have ghosts we carry, she said. Sometimes they're people. Sometimes they're memories. I've had my share of both. This one might be guiding you in its own way. No. Jon looked into her eyes, the sister who'd seen horrors and grown into a capable, if grim, protector of their family. Thank you, he said quietly. I worry about the future, about what the realm will force me to do. But at least I know I can trust you, Sansa Bran. We have each other, no matter what happens next. A faint smile curved Arya's lips, a rare flash of her younger self. Always, she said. Then her face grew serious. Daenerys. What do you plan to do about her? She's strong, but she could be dangerous if she feels threatened. Her dragons still roost beyond these walls, and her armies could march with a word. I'm waiting. He ran a hand through his hair. I meant what I said. I'm not going to challenge her claim. We need each other if the realm is to remain stable. And we have feelings for each other, complicated though they may be. Arya's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing. He read the subtle disquiet in her expression. She trusted him, but not necessarily Daenerys. He understood that caution. He shared it. Whatever happens, he continued, we stay vigilant. If I see a sign that she means harm to the north, or that she's not the queen she claims to be, I'll act. For now, I believe we can find a path to peace. Arya nodded, accepting his words for the moment. I'll be watching, she said simply. She moved toward the door, pausing with her hand on the latch. Get some rest, Jon. We don't know what the next day will bring. With that, she slipped out, leaving him alone with the crackling fire. Jon stood there a moment, clutching the amulet in his hand, feeling the weight of countless decisions pressing down on him. Before, he had always been a man of simple wants, a place to belong, a purpose to serve. Now, that purpose might shape the entire realm. He set the amulet on a small table and approached the window, the glass panes trembling in the wind. Outside, darkness was edging across the sky, a shroud descending upon Winterfell. Torches flared along the battlements, and he could make out the silhouettes of patrolling guards. The faint glow illuminated swirling flurries of snow as the winter night reasserted its claim. He wondered if Rhaegar, in his final days, had ever stood on some balcony, haunted by the knowledge of what war had wrought, searching for a way to forge peace. He wondered if he, Jon, might succeed where Rhaegar failed, or if destiny was determined to repeat the cycle of destruction. But a warm flicker of hope stirred in him as he recalled the words that had bound him to his people. He had bled for them, and they for him. That bond was neither a matter of official decrees nor lineage. It was born of shared struggle, shared sacrifice. Perhaps that bond was stronger than the dusty claims of old lineage. His watch extended long into the evening, filled with drifting thoughts and the steady beat of his heart. Now that the truth was spoken, he felt a subtle shift in himself. He was not quite the man he'd been before entering that hidden courtyard in Winterfell. Not quite the same man who had bowed his head to Daenerys in Dragonstone. He was a son of both fathers, and he had chosen to live in the light of that truth, not the shadows. If the realm would accept him, it would accept him for who he was, not the lie. If it rejected him, so be it. He would stand by his convictions. Hours slipped by. He eventually sank onto the bed, too weary to remove more than his boots and cloak. He listened to the wind outside, the slow lull of his own breathing. Tomorrow, more questions would arise. He would need to decide how to handle the delicate matter of southern politics, how to unify his fractious allies, how to address the tension between him and Daenerys. But for tonight, he let himself drift, recalling Rhaegar's faint smile in that vision, the final words that lingered like a lullaby. Protect what you love, my son. Let that guide your choices. When morning broke, it began with a dull gray light that barely illuminated the whirling snow. Jon stirred in bed, sore in every muscle, half believing he'd only just closed his eyes. He rose to find a light dusting of snow had settled on the windowsill. Pulling on thicker clothing, he left the amulet where it lay, and headed out to begin the tasks of another day. He would speak with Sansa and Davos regarding supply lines, or meet with Tyrion about the approach to the Southern Lords. Perhaps even share a word with Daenerys about forging a compromise that the realm could embrace. He had no illusions this would be easy, but there was a new steadiness in his heart. Down in the yard, Arya sparred with Brienne of Tarth, while onlookers gaped at the fluidity and lethal grace of two of the finest fighters in the north. Sansa stood at the edge, speaking to Gendry, who had arrived with a small party from the Stormlands the night before. On the ramparts, Daenerys and Tyrion conversed quietly. Jon paused in the doorway, observing them all. The hush of fresh snow muffled the usual noise, giving the courtyard a sense of solemn anticipation. He made his way down the steps, and the watchers turned as he approached. There were bows and curt nods from the guards. A stable boy hurried by, leading a horse with a fresh dusting of white along its mane. In the corner, Davos greeted him with a respectful incline of the head. "Morning, my lord. Will you break your fast?" Jon shook his head. "Not yet," he said, glancing at the training yard. "I'll see if I can catch my sister and Lady Brienne. Then we'll talk." Davos smiled faintly. "A full day, then?" Jon breathed in the cold air. He said simply. "Let's hope it leads us closer to a lasting peace." He walked on, greeting men and women who had stood by his side through countless battles. Some looked at him with the same loyalty they always had. Others eyed him curiously, still grappling with the revelation of his parentage. Yet none showed open hostility. For now, that would suffice. Trust was earned, and he was willing to keep earning it. As he passed a group of watchers, a memory teased the back of his mind, how he once stood on the wall, imagining the world beyond. That boy who knew nothing of his mother, nothing of his future, had grown into a man straddling two powerful legacies. The Tower of Joy lived within him. Winterfell lived within him. Ice and fire intertwined in his veins. But he was Jon, shaped by the men and women around him, by the hard lessons of life, by the love he had known and lost. And so, as he stepped into the training grounds, as the swirl of winter air caught the edges of his cloak, he felt no crown atop his head, no illusions of grandeur. He felt only the rush of purpose, the promise to protect what he loved, and the faint echo of a father's words guiding his every step. No matter what the realm threw at him, no matter the doubts or intrigues or betrayals, he would face them. He was a Stark and a Targaryen. But above all, he was Jon, and the world could make of that what it would. He would stand firm, forging a new path for his people, with the memory of Rhaegar's quiet plea lighting the way through any darkness yet to come. Okay. Jon paused in the open archway leading into the training yard, letting the swirl of snow whip around his legs. The pale light of morning dusted the yard with a smoky haze, and the shapes within moved in half-silhouette. He saw Brienne of Tarth's tall figure, hair pulled back, in easy sparring form against Arya's smaller, lithe presence. The two circled each other with wooden practice swords, an intensity in their posture that made the watching men keep a safe distance. The snap of each parry rang across the yard, echoing off the ancient stones. Jon stepped forward, boots crunching against a frozen patch of gravel. A swirl of snow settled on his cloak, and Arya glanced over, her steel-gray eyes meeting his for a fleeting heartbeat, before she refocused on Brienne. Arya dropped into a feint, pivoted, and caught the knight's practice blade against her own. They moved with a fluid synchronicity, as though they had done this dance countless times, an unspoken respect passing between them. Over by the stable wall, Gendry observed with his arms crossed, wearing an expression that blended pride and unease. He hadn't taken his eyes off Arya since Jon's arrival, as if he worried that her next maneuver might put her at risk. Jon couldn't help but notice the subtle tension in the young man's posture. A mix of protectiveness and wariness, perhaps uncertain how to engage with someone like Arya. who was both a noblewoman of House Stark and a deadlier fighter than most men he had known. The onlookers fell silent when Jon moved nearer, their eyes flicking to the man they now knew was both a Stark and a Targaryen. Whispers of his parentage had circulated enough that nearly everyone understood the basic truth. He was Lyanna Stark's son by Rhaegar Targaryen, though he had chosen to keep the name Jon Snow, the name by which all of them knew him. For many of these men, the revelation was still fresh, and Jon could see it in their hesitant nods and the curious tilt of their heads. Not hostile, not wholly accepting, somewhere in between. Brienne disengaged from Arya with a smooth turn, lightly pressing her sword hand to her breastplate in a courteous bow. Arya responded with a playful quirk of her lips, stepping back to gather her breath. Snow flurried around them in a lazy pattern, dusting their shoulders. Arya tossed her wooden blade to a squire who scampered forward. Then she brushed a stray lock of hair from her forehead and strolled toward Jon. "You're late," she said, arching an eyebrow. The corner of her mouth lifted, an echo of humor beneath her composed exterior. Jon returned her smirk. "I can't always rise before dawn to watch my little sister beat the seven hells out of the best knight in the north." Brienne inclined her head to Jon in greeting. "A privilege to watch or a privilege to endure, my lord." Her voice carried that even tone of measured respect, though her eyes sparkled with good-natured challenge. Arya gave a light shrug, as if to indicate that she was bored with easy victories. "I could try my hand against either of you," Jon joked, knowing well enough that between the two of them, they'd give him a thorough lesson. "But I think I'd rather keep my pride intact." Arya glanced around the training yard, noticing a slight hush as soldiers and onlookers realized the king in the north had joined them. Some men offered stiff bows. Others looked uncertain, as if not sure how to address him. Arya shifted her stance, folding her arms. "There's a reason you're here, I wager. Unless you simply wanted to see Brienne's sword nearly take my head off." Jon allowed his gaze to travel across the yard. The old winter sky seemed heavier now, the wind picking up just enough to stir cloaks and rattle the edges of the wooden practice dummies. "I came to see how the new recruits fare," he said quietly. "The North needs all the strong arms it can muster, but we need skill too. They've been training for weeks. I want to get a sense of their progress." Brienne nodded. "They're still rough, but they listen well. Most of them are loyal to your name, and their spirits are high. A few came from the Vale, even from the Riverlands, looking for new opportunities. If we keep drilling them through the winter, come spring, you'll have a decent force. They respect your command." "Mono." Arya's attention flicked to a small cluster of men sparring near the corner of the yard, their footwork sloppy. "They respect Jon's command because he earned it, but old grudges remain. Some served the Boltons once. They're trying to fit in, but resentment lingers." She shrugged. "We can weed out the troublemakers, or we can let them prove themselves. Whichever you decide." Jon looked at his sister, appreciating her frankness. "We'll keep an eye on them," he said. "Everyone deserves a chance to redeem themselves, but not if they plot treachery." He paused, letting his gaze fall on the recruits. "I plan to talk to them in the next day or two. Remind them that we're forging a new beginning, no matter who they once served. If they're loyal now, that's what matters." Behind him, a small stir alerted him to the approach of Davos. The older knight offered a respectful dip of his head to Arya and Brienne before turning to Jon. "My lord, Sansa requests your presence in the Great Solar," he said. "She's meeting with some of the lords who lingered after yesterday's gathering. Seems they've got more questions about how we'll handle trade with the Vale and the new tax structure for rebuilding." Davos let out a soft sigh. "They're more restless than a nest of wasps." Jon nodded grimly. "I'll be right there." He offered a polite farewell to Brienne, then followed Davos and Arya back across the yard. Gendry fell into step behind Arya, silent but determined. The yard parted around them, men bowing slightly or turning to watch as their liege lord exited. They walked in relative silence through the courtyard gates, the heavy iron-bound doors groaning open, letting in a gust of cold air. Torches sputtered in wall sconces, giving off plumes of smoke that mingled with the snowy breeze. Above them, ramparts were lined with guards carrying crossbows, ever vigilant. The watchers nodded at Jon's presence, seemingly reassured by his casual inspection. Inside Winterfell's main keep, Warmth enveloped them. The corridor stone floor was laid with rushes, and large braziers glowed at intervals, throwing flickers of yellow and orange along the walls. Servants bustled past, arms laden with linens, or casks of ale, or baskets of salt and smoked fish. The aroma of cooking onions and stew drifted from the kitchens, and for a moment, Jon's stomach rumbled in reminder that he had yet to break his fast properly. He paused with Davos at a juncture in the passage. Arya lingered, while Gendry hung back a short distance, trying to look inconspicuous. "You go on," she said to Jon. "I've still got training to do, and I might speak with Gendry about forging some new blades." Her tone was light, but she looked sidelong at the black-haired smith with a hint of challenge. Gendry simply gave a quick nod, glancing at the specks of snow melting on the stone floor. "Don't stab anyone who doesn't deserve it," Jon teased. A faint flicker of a smile touched Arya's lips, that quiet warmth she let him see once in a while. Then she turned and headed for the stairwell that would lead her deeper into the keep, Gendry following in her wake. Davos tilted his head in their direction. "They make a curious pair," he mused. Jon nodded, gaze still on the spot where Arya had disappeared around the bend. "They do," he said. "But I trust her. And him. Perhaps more than half the lords assembled here." He gestured for Davos to lead on. "Best not keep Sansa waiting. The last thing we need is more friction among the lords." They continued down a wide corridor that opened onto a broad flight of steps. As they climbed, the chill of winter receded behind them, replaced by the hearth heat that radiated through the stones. Jon wondered, not for the first time, if the hidden hot springs beneath Winterfell played a role in the subtle warmth that spread through certain halls. He remembered being a boy, marveling at how the floors rarely froze here as they did in lesser keeps across the north. At the top of the stairs, 2 guards stood sentinel outside the solar. They stepped aside at Jon's approach, allowing him and Davos to enter. Inside, the room was softly lit by tall windows that overlooked the snowy courtyard. A large oak table in the center was strewn with scrolls, maps, and half-rolled parchments bearing wax seals. Sansa was seated at the head of the table, posture regal, her red hair braided in a coronet around her head. She looked up, relief flitting across her features when she saw Jon arrive. Seated around her were several northern lords, Lord Glover, Lord Manderley, Lord Serwyn, and, somewhat surprisingly, Lord Jon Royce from the Vale. Another figure stood off to the side, half shrouded in the shadow near the tall windows. Tyrion Lannister, arms folded in quiet observation. Jon noted the tension in the lines of Sansa's shoulders, the way she held her chin slightly raised, as though bracing for a verbal spar. Lord Glover rose immediately, offering Jon a terse bow. "My lord," he said, though he hesitated a fraction, as if uncertain whether to call Jon King in the north or use some new form of address. It was enough of a pause that Jon felt a ripple of old annoyance at the man's vacillation. But he suppressed it, returning a polite nod. Sansa gestured to an open seat beside her. "Jon, we were just discussing the shipments of grain coming from the Vale. Lord Royce believes it may be possible to increase our imports to help the smaller holdfasts recover from the harsh winter. But we need to ensure that the roads remain protected. Bandits have taken advantage of the chaos left by the wars." "No." Tyrion cleared his throat softly, stepping out of the shadow. "And certain unscrupulous merchants seek to profit from everyone's exhaustion. If the North is forced to pay exorbitant rates for grain, it can hamper our rebuilding efforts. Meanwhile, merchants from Essos might flood the market with cheap goods, undermining local economies. It's a delicate balance." Jon sank into the chair, exchanging a brief look with Sansa, who seemed drained. "I understand. We need to keep trade routes open but also ensure fair pricing. Lord Royce, your assistance is welcome." He nodded in respect to the older man. Royce was known for his blunt manner and unwavering loyalty to House Arryn. "What do you propose?" Royce shifted in his seat, hands braced on the table. "We can provide an escort of Vale Knights to accompany caravans heading north, at least for the next few months. It'll protect against any rogues or broken men still wandering the roads. In return, we ask for certain trade concessions. Tax exemptions on shipments passing through the Neck for instance. Nabator. Lord Manderley harumphed. Sounds fair enough, but let's not forget that House Manderley also keeps men on the roads. We've done our part to keep bandits at bay. If the Vale wants more favorable terms, I'd say the Lords of White Harbor might request a share of the Val's shipments for our own stores. At cost, of course. Menimro. A flicker of irritation passed over Royce's face, but before he could respond, Tyrion intervened. These details can be worked out in a contract, with input from all parties. No one should feel taken advantage of. He glanced at Jon. But we also need clarity on the chain of command if trouble arises. There's talk in the South about a single seat of power, or at least a centralized authority that can levy taxes fairly. Daenerys Targaryen is queen by her own right, but the North has declared you king. Malwen Powell. Silence followed as all eyes turned to Jon, the tension thickening in the air. He glanced from one face to another, reading wariness and curiosity. Even Sansa looked at him, as if waiting to see how he would navigate this topic. Jon cleared his throat. We are not here to unravel the North's independence. The Lords named me king in the North, and I remain so until they choose otherwise. Queen Daenerys understands our unique position. Our arrangement is an alliance, not subjugation. Royce's brows knit. And what if Lords in the Vale, or the Reach, or the Stormlands question that arrangement? What if they see you as the rightful Targaryen heir? Will they rally to your banner, hoping to pit you against Daenerys in some new conflict? Jon's jaw tightened. He hated repeating the same reassurances, but he understood the concerns. I've said before, and I'll say it again. I do not seek the Iron Throne. My mother was Lyanna Stark. My father was Rhaegar Targaryen, but I will not press a claim. I stand by Daenerys, and I stand by the North. We want peace, not another war. The realm cannot endure another war. Duh. Some of the lords nodded in weary agreement. Tyrion took a careful step forward. Still, perception matters, my lord. Whisperers from King's Landing might say that you're merely waiting for an opportune moment to seize power. Rumors can spark conflict faster than swords. Sansa leaned forward, hands clasped atop a thick ledger. Then, we must be vigilant. Show through action that we uphold the alliance. If we speak with one voice, if we coordinate trade and security, we can avoid giving those whisperers any real ammunition. Jon let out a quiet breath. He admired Sansa's diplomatic skill, even as he knew the complexity of the challenges ahead. Agreed. Let's settle the immediate matter. The road security and the terms for Vale imports. Davos, can you draft an agreement with Lord Royce and Lord Manderley? Keep it fair and simple. We need shipments flowing before the next moon. Davos inclined his head. As you wish. I'll work with them on the details. Perhaps Lady Sansa or Tyrion can look it over before we seal it. Lord Glover cleared his throat. And what of the Iron Islands, my lord? We've heard precious little about their stance now that the war is done. Have we had any word from them? Didn't seem helps. Sansa answered, her tone steady. A raven arrived from Yara Greyjoy. She reclaims her father's seat and promises no raids on the North's coasts if we respect the Ironborn's independence. They've lost too much in these wars to risk another fight. She also offers ships for transporting goods if needed. Jon's eyes flicked to Tyrion for confirmation. Tyrion gave a slight shrug. It seems genuine. Yara's proven more honorable than her predecessors. If she says she wants peace, she likely means it. Jon nodded slowly. Then we accept. So long as she keeps her word. The North has no quarrel with the Iron Islands if they leave our shores unmolested. We can use all the help we can get in rebuilding. He looked around the table. Any objections? No one spoke. Lord Glover's mouth pressed into a thin line, but he said nothing. Sansa took note, but let it pass. There was a sense of weary acceptance, as if these lords had endured enough strife to realize that forging alliances was preferable to inviting further bloodshed. After another half-hour of discussion, mostly details about caravan routes, toll points, and harbor fees, Sansa dismissed the lords. They bowed to Jon one by one, departing the solar in a swirl of cloaks and bootsteps. Tyrion lingered, leaning against a stone pillar, his face thoughtful. When the last lord was gone, he turned to Jon and Sansa. "That went smoother than I feared," he remarked. "Still, it might be wise for Daenerys to make a public statement reinforcing your alliance. I know you've said you prefer to handle the North's affairs yourselves, but the realm will look for signs of unity." "Nah." Jon raked a hand through his hair, exhaustion tugging at him. "I'll speak to her. Maybe we can do something when the weather improves. Host a small feast or a ceremony that reaffirms our friendship. Let the rumor mongers see we stand side by side." He glanced at Sansa. "Thoughts?" She pursed her lips. "It could help, but we should be mindful not to appear as though we're forcing the North to kneel again. This is a delicate balance. The Northern lords need to feel that they're equal partners, not vassals. Will Daenerys accept that?" "They..." Tyrion offered a tight smile. "She's learning. It isn't always easy for her, given how she was raised to believe in her birthright. But she's seen enough war to know what continued conflict might bring. If you approach her with fairness, I think she'll agree." Jon sighed. "Very well. I'll arrange a meeting with her later today, or tomorrow at the latest. There's plenty to discuss." Sansa rose, gathering a stack of parchments. "I need to review these figures on the winter stores. We're not as short as we feared, but the outer villages need extra supplies." She pressed her lips together, her blue eyes filled with determination. "I can handle this, Jon. You've got enough on your plate." He offered a grateful nod. "Thank you." A moment passed, a silent exchange of warmth between siblings who had once known so many misunderstandings. Now, they shouldered the burdens of leadership side by side. Tyrion discreetly excused himself, stepping out to track down Davos or perhaps to speak with the Vale contingent once more. Alone with Sansa in the solar, Jon lingered by the window. Outside, the snow fell in a gentle swirl, turning Winterfell's courtyard into a muted tapestry of white and gray. Sansa joined him, folding her arms across her furs. "I know this is difficult for you," she said softly. "Being forced to constantly answer questions about your parentage, your loyalty. But you're doing well." He turned to look at her, noticing the faint shadows under her eyes. "You're tired, Sansa. Are you sleeping at all?" She managed a small, wry smile. "Perhaps not as much as I should. There's always something needing my attention. But I can rest soon. I promise." "Nebefio." Jon nodded, not pressing the matter further. She was strong, in her own way, carrying a composure that had blossomed through adversity. He realized he relied on her more than he ever had. "We can't solve everything at once," he murmured. "But we'll keep taking steps, one by one." Her gaze drifted to the window again, toward the swirling snow. "Yes," she said. "One step at a time." They parted ways, Sansa heading off with her stack of parchments, Jon stepping into the corridor. The echo of footsteps on stone followed him as he descended into the main keep. He found his mind drifting to Daenerys. How she might react to these new developments, to the possibility of a public display of unity. A small flicker of anxiety coiled in his chest. Their bond had been genuine once, forged under the threat of annihilation by the dead, but it had changed since learning they shared Targaryen blood. The realm's politics pulled them in different directions. He passed a pair of guards standing near the entrance to the Great Hall. They saluted as he approached, but then one cleared his throat, daring to address him. "Begging your pardon, my lord," the guard said. "We've heard talk of Lady Daenerys dragons. Are they still kept beyond the walls?" Jon paused. "Yes, they hunt when the weather allows, but they remain near the old Godswood clearing. They're not a threat to Winterfell or its people as long as no one tries to provoke them." The guard nodded, a trace of awe in his eyes. "Understood, my lord. Just curious." Jon pressed his lips together in a faint smile. He remembered that people of the North had seldom seen dragons. At least not in centuries. A living dragon was a legend come to life, and it could sow both wonder and fear. He continued on, pushing open the heavy wooden doors to the Great Hall. Within, he spotted a group of stewards clearing away the remains of a midday meal, the air fragrant with leftover bread and roasted meat. Trestle tables, stretched in neat rows, and the tall hearths glowed with fresh wood. Near the dais, Tyrion stood in quiet conversation with Missandei and Grey Worm, two of Daenerys' most trusted advisors from across the sea. Grey Worm's stoic countenance betrayed little, though Missandei nodded politely as Jon approached, her thick curls framing her warm features. "Lord Snow," she greeted, a courtesy that danced on the edge between formality and friendliness. Jon dipped his head in acknowledgement. "I'm looking for Daenerys. Have you seen her?" Grey Worm answered in a measured tone. She was headed to the battlements near the eastern wall. She wanted to see her dragons before the snow thickened. "Yes." Jon cast a brief glance at Tyrion, who shrugged. "We just finished our talk about the Southern Lords. She needed a moment, I think. The North can be overwhelming." "Thank you," Jon said. "I'll find her there." He offered a cordial nod to Grey Worm and Missandei before turning to go. He could feel Tyrion's gaze linger, as though the Lannister wanted to say something further, but they parted without exchanging words. The eastern battlements were a short walk from the Great Hall, accessible by a set of curving steps that spiraled upward. As Jon climbed, he heard the wind rise in a restless moan, rattling the old banners that hung from the towers. He emerged onto the ramparts to a sweeping view of Winterfell's eastern fields, a rolling expanse now shrouded in thick drifts of white. In the distance, he could make out the treetops of the Wolf's Wood, frost-laden branches swaying in the wind. Near the crenellations, Daenerys stood with her back to him, the train of her white fur cloak stirring around her ankles. Her silver-gold hair was braided in an intricate pattern, and she wore thick gloves that matched the pale hue of her attire. The posture of her shoulders spoke of contemplation, or perhaps restlessness, as though she was searching the horizon for some lost promise. Jon approached, footsteps muffled by snow. She must have heard him, because she turned slightly, the wind catching the wisps of hair that framed her face. A small, tentative smile curved her lips. "It's beautiful here," she said softly, gesturing to the vast winter landscape. "So different from anything I knew in Essos or even the Crownlands." Jon moved to stand beside her, resting his hands on the cold stone of the parapet. "The North is harsh, but there's a stark beauty in it," he said, his breath curling in frosty tendrils. "You've faced the long night here. I'm grateful for that." They stood in silence for a moment, side by side, gazing across the endless stretch of snow and ice. He stole a glance at her profile, her violet eyes scanning the horizon, her expression tinged with the same uncertainty he felt within himself. Eventually, he cleared his throat. "Tyrion mentioned that we should consider a public gesture. Something to show that we're united despite everything." She nodded slowly. "Yes, he spoke to me as well. The realm looks for any sign of division they can exploit." Her tone carried a faint bitterness, a weariness at the relentless politics that dogged her steps. Jon exhaled, sending a plume of vapor into the icy air. "We can host a feast or a ceremony in the courtyard. Invite the Northern Lords, the Vale Lords still here, your advisors. Show them we stand on common ground." A small crinkle appeared between her brows. "A feast might help, or a simple gathering where we toast to the future. But will it truly settle their doubts? Some think I'm a foreign invader. Others suspect you of undermining me with your own claim." He met her gaze. "I'll speak plainly. I'll remind them again that I support your claim and don't seek the throne. You can address them as well. Reaffirm that the North's independence isn't threatened. Words alone won't be enough, but it's a start." Daenerys' lips thinned, though not in anger. "I hate how everything seems to hinge on appearances and proclamations. In Essos, I freed slaves because it was the right thing to do, not because I needed to prove something to suspicious lords." "Then?" Jon placed a hand lightly on her shoulder. "I understand, but Westeros is different, and the North is different from the rest of Westeros. They've been burned, literally and figuratively, by rulers from the South before. They need assurance." She turned toward him fully, the wind tugging at her cloak. For a moment, the distance that had grown between them narrowed, and there was that old flicker of warmth in her eyes. "And what of us, Jon? Do we need assurance from each other as well? I know we haven't spoken much about what we shared before we learned of your parentage." "None." His heart clenched at the memory of those tender moments, both in Dragonstone and beyond. We do, he admitted. But I don't know what shape that assurance can take. We're family by blood, but we didn't know. Yet, he swallowed. I still care for you, Daenerys, I always will. But it's difficult. She lowered her gaze, snowflakes catching in her lashes. It is. Targaryens married brother to sister for generations, though I never thought it a path for me. And in the north, it's considered abomination, or at best, deeply frowned upon. Her tone was more wistful than resolute. We cannot force the north to accept something they find abhorrent, nor can we ask ourselves to pretend these feelings never existed. Jon let out a long breath. So we proceed carefully, focusing on the realm's stability, on building trust. Whatever else we feel, maybe we set it aside. No. She nodded in pained agreement, stepping back to let the chill wind slip between them once more. You're right, she murmured. I never wanted the throne to cost me so much. She turned away, looking once again over the snowy fields. I'll do what must be done for the greater good. Jon watched her profile, a pang in his chest. The weight of their shared burdens felt as vast as the white expanse before them. I'll arrange the gathering for 2 days hence, he said quietly. We'll invite everyone of note, a demonstration of solidarity. After that, we decide our next steps. Mamie. She bowed her head, cloak rippling behind her. I'll be there, and I'll speak from the heart. A sudden gust kicked at her feet, swirling snow around her in delicate eddies. My dragons should hunt soon. I might ride one out to see if I can find them something to chase. They grow restless here in the cold. He recognized she sought a moment of freedom, an escape from these endless walls of doubt. Be careful, he said softly. Winter storms can be treacherous. She offered him a brief smile, so faint he nearly missed it. Thank you. I will. Without further words, she turned and walked along the rampart, descending a stone staircase that led to the open fields beyond. Jon remained at the parapet, watching her go, until her figure vanished behind a drift of snow and the gloom of the rampart walls. The hush of the wind filled his ears, and he realized he was alone with his thoughts once more. A part of him yearned to join her, to climb atop Rhaegar or Drogon, and soar above the world. But duty anchored him here. The north needed him on the ground, overseeing the delicate repairs to a realm still recovering from nightmares. And so he stayed, leaning on the rough stone, letting the cold prickle his face, forcing himself to breathe steady and calm. By the time he descended the ramparts, the afternoon had worn on. The yard below was quieter now. Most men had taken shelter from the chill. He walked past the forges, where Gendry and Arya were deep in conversation, Gendry's hammer raised mid-stroke. Arya glanced up, noticing Jon's passing, but didn't call out. She seemed absorbed in whatever designs Gendry was etching onto the iron. Jon gave them a small nod of acknowledgement, and continued on, heading for the keep's entrance. Inside, he found Davos waiting in the foyer, speaking with a messenger who clutched a small pouch of sealed letters. The messenger bowed quickly when he saw Jon and hurried away. Davos beckoned Jon closer, rubbing his hands to chase away the cold. We've received word from King's Landing, he said. Or what's left of it. Sounds like the city's governed by a patchwork council, with remnants of the Lannisters and Tyrells and others. They want to know if you'll send an envoy to discuss the future of the Iron Throne. They? Jon clenched his jaw. It was only a matter of time before the seat of power came calling, uncertain how to treat the North and the Targaryen queen. What do they propose? Davos shrugged. Likely a negotiation. They want Daenerys to come and claim the throne officially, or else clarify whether she even cares about ruling them. They're worried that if there's a power vacuum, someone else might rise. I suppose they've heard rumors of your parentage as well. Jon sighed. They want stability. All of Westeros is tired of war. But if we go to King's Landing ourselves, the Northern Lords will worry we mean to kneel. Or worse. Never wand. That's the gist of it, Davos agreed. Still, ignoring them might just sow more distrust. Eventually, the realm needs a recognized government, and if the Queen doesn't step up, someone else will. Could be another distant Targaryen loyalist with a claim, or some opportunistic lord from the Reach. The last thing we need is more chaos. Jon felt a headache forming behind his eyes. We'll add it to the list of topics for the gathering with Daenerys. See if she wants to send an envoy. Maybe Tyrion, or someone she trusts. But I won't ride south until I'm sure the north is secure. Memutran. Davos nodded. A sensible approach. No sense venturing into that viper's nest until we've built a stable foundation here. He glanced around, noticing the thinning bustle in the corridor. Shall we get some warmth? A cup of mulled wine, perhaps? You look half frozen. Jon almost declined, the weight of unending duties pressing upon him. But a sudden wave of exhaustion changed his mind. A moment of warmth sounds good, he conceded. Let's go. They made their way to a smaller hall, often used by trusted advisors for private meals. A central hearth crackled, and benches lined the walls. A few servants hurried about, laying out cups and steaming pitchers. Davos poured them each a mug of spiced wine, the aroma of cloves and cinnamon drifting up in a comforting cloud. Jon wrapped his chilled hands around the ceramic surface, letting the heat seep into his bones. Davos sipped, then set his cup down. Are you managing well, lad? He asked gently. I know the realm demands so much from you, but you've hardly had a moment to reckon with your own revelations. You found out your entire identity was built on a secret. That can't be easy. Jon stared at the swirling liquid in his cup, thinking of Rhaegar's soft-spoken voice in that vision at the Tower of Joy. The memory still felt dreamlike and raw. I'm coping, he said slowly. Some days, it feels as though my father, Ned Stark, will always be my true father, blood or not. Other days I wonder what life might have been if I'd known Rhaegar. If he'd lived, if the war never happened. But there's no time to dwell on it. Too many people need me to make decisions. Tamaran? Davos nodded sympathetically. Leadership is a lonely weight. I carried it a bit when Stannis was left with hardly any men, but it's nothing like what you face now. Just remember you've got friends, all right? We may not have your burdens, but we're here to help where we can. Jon managed a small, grateful smile. Thank you. I won't forget it. They finished their wine in companionable silence, letting the warmth ease the tension of the day. Servants replaced the empty pitchers with fresh jugs, and more men trickled in seeking a moment's rest. Guards, junior officers, even a couple of Vale knights. They all glanced at Jon as if seeking permission to settle. Jon waved them over, and soon the small hall filled with low conversation. The sense of communal relief was palpable. Eventually, Jon rose, not wanting to linger too long. There was still much to do before nightfall, letters to read, a strategy to form for the gathering he intended to host in 2 days' time. He and Davos parted ways, the older man heading off to check on the progress of the trade negotiations, while Jon returned to his personal chambers to gather quill and parchment. In the corridor, he passed by Bran. His younger brother sat in his wheeled chair near a narrow window, half turned to look outside. Snow drifting in from the open shutter settled in Bran's dark hair. He seemed lost in thought, or perhaps in one of his visions, though his gaze was outward rather than inward. Jon approached carefully. Bran, he said softly, so as not to startle him. Do you need help moving? Bran shook his head slowly, returning his focus to the corridor. No, he answered, voice distant. I was just watching the ravens. They fly over the walls, searching for food in the fields. Sometimes I see what they see. Jon swallowed, always a bit uneasy about Bran's abilities, though he trusted him fully. Anything we should be worried about? He asked, scanning Bran's expression. There are scattered groups of wildlings returning to their ancestral lands beyond the wall. No threat there, just families trying to rebuild. And I sense the beginnings of unrest in the south, in the Stormlands, but it's faint, hard to discern yet. Bran lifted his gaze to Jon. No immediate danger. Not from White Walkers, not from some newly risen threat, but men can create disasters all on their own. Jon nodded slowly. They can. We'll do our best to keep it from boiling over. He hesitated, then lowered his voice. Bran, have you seen anything? About my father? My real father, Rhaegar. Since we last spoke, a flicker crossed Bran's features. Now and then, I glimpsed moments of the past. He was tormented by duty, but also driven by a dream of uniting the realm. I've seen him in the Red Keep's library, studying old prophecies, muttering to himself about the prince that was promised. He believed in it wholeheartedly, so much that he neglected the political realities unraveling around him. Bran sighed, a surprisingly human expression of regret. I think he meant well, but fate caught up with him. Jon felt a tightness in his chest. Thank you for telling me. There was so much more he wanted to ask, but time pressed on. He clapped Bran lightly on the shoulder. Stay warm. Bran nodded, turning his gaze back to the drifting snow outside the window. Jon left him there, descending in another corridor that led to his private chamber. Once inside, he bolted the door, stoked the fire in the hearth, and dropped onto a stool. Quill and parchment awaited him on the small desk. He realized he had to compose messages not only to the Southern Council in King's Landing, but also to potential allies across the realm, from the Riverlands to the Vale, from the Westerlands to Dorne. If they wanted to avoid a new war, communication was key. Yet he dreaded the endless flurry of letters, each weighed with political minefields. He reached into the desk drawer and withdrew that old amulet bearing the three-headed dragon, worn and battered. He turned it over in his hand, feeling the rough edges press into his palm. The flicker of the hearth cast dancing shadows over the carved ridges. His father's symbol. In that silent moment, Jon thought he could almost hear the faint echo of Rhaegar's voice. Protect what you love? A weary sigh escaped him. He set the amulet gently on the desk, as though it were a fragile relic of a lost age, then dipped the quill in ink. The first letter he wrote was to King's Landing, an acknowledgement of their request, suggesting a future meeting or envoy. He kept his words measured and polite, offering no immediate commitment to bring Daenerys there. Then he drafted notes to a handful of minor lords, who had expressed lingering doubts about the new alliances. His handwriting, never the neatest, took on an uneven slope as he pressed pen to parchment. Hours slipped by. Outside, the sky deepened into early evening, bruised clouds shading the horizon. A servant knocked quietly, leaving a tray of supper, stew, bread, and a pitcher of ale. Jon scarcely noticed until the stew had gone cold. He forced himself to eat a few bites, conscious that he had to keep his strength up. At last, his hand aching from writing, he set aside the quill. He looked over the letters with a feeling of grim satisfaction, then sealed them with his personal sigil. A wolf's head, for though he was a Targaryen in blood, he would forever claim the Stark identity that shaped him. He realized he had used the same wax for each, the same seal. Quiet declaration, perhaps. The realm might whisper that he was a Targaryen heir, but so long as he wrote these letters, he did so as Jon of House Stark. He rose and paced the chamber, trying to ease the stiffness in his legs. Eventually, he stepped into the corridor. The hour was late now. Only a few torches lit the hall, and shadows stretched long across the stones. A handful of guards patrolled, greeting him with subdued courtesy. He wandered in the direction of the library, remembering the night Sam had spent there, poring over tomes for any clue to defeat the White Walkers. Sam was gone now, sent back to the Citadel to help rebuild and gather knowledge that might benefit the realm. Jon missed him, missed his earnest counsel and steady optimism. Lost in thought, he nearly collided with Daenerys near an intersection in the corridor. She looked as though she had just come from outside, her cheeks tinged with cold, and a faint tremor passing through her limbs. Snow clung to the edges of her boots. "Oh," she said, startled, then softened when she recognized him. "I just returned from a short flight with Rhaegar. The weather made it difficult." He steadied her with a gentle hand on her arm. "You should warm yourself by the fire. Here, let me." He guided her toward a small antechamber that housed a brazier. The room was unoccupied at this hour, its chairs draped in shadows. She shrugged off her cloak, letting him help drape it over a bench near the brazier to dry. Her eyes flicked to his. "Rhaegar remembers you," she said quietly. "He let me fly, but he sensed something missing, I think. He recognizes you as well." Jon felt a pang of longing. The bond he had with the dragon was part of his Targaryen heritage, yet he had barely explored it. "Perhaps when the weather's calmer I might ride with you," he offered. Then he noticed her shiver. "You're half frozen." She wrapped her arms around herself. "I'll be fine." The flight was exhilarating, but the winds are stronger than I expected. A storm might be coming. Jon found himself stepping closer, the brazier's glow casting a flicker of light across their faces. For an instant, they were simply two people seeking warmth, battered by winter and the storms of fate. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat. The memories of their time together, before the revelation, shimmered like half-forgotten dreams. It felt both impossible and inevitable that they should find themselves alone in a dark corner, hearts burdened with unspoken feelings. Daenerys looked up, meeting his gaze. Her eyes reflected the brazier's glow, deep and uncertain. "I wish." She paused, searching for the right phrase, then shook her head. "So many wishes, but none that will change the truth." He found her hand, the leather of her gloves cold to the touch. He hesitated. An urge to close that distance once more warred with the knowledge of the taboo that overshadowed them. "We can still be allies, friends," he said quietly. "We can care for each other, even if it's not the way we once thought." A moment passed, filled with the crackle of coals and the swirl of wind outside. She gave his hand a gentle squeeze, then let go. "We can," she agreed, "and we must. For the good of our people." He stepped back, the chill creeping between them again. "We'll hold the gathering in 2 days. Together, we'll show everyone the strength of our alliance." She nodded, exhaling a tense breath. "I'll be ready." Then she retrieved her cloak from the bench, pulling it around her shoulders. "You should rest, Jon. We'll need our wits sharp. Winter doesn't forgive weakness." He almost smiled at the odd echo of Ned Stark's old adage, "Winter is coming. You too." "Good night, Daenerys." She inclined her head, then slipped into the corridor. Jon watched her go, feeling a mix of relief and regret. After a moment, he extinguished the brazier, leaving only the flickering torch outside to guide him. The halls were nearly empty, a hush settling over Winterfell. In his chambers, he found the fire burned low, and he fed it a couple more logs before settling onto his bed, the old furs piled high to ward off the cold. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by half-formed dreams. He saw Rhaegar again, standing in a swirl of dust at the Tower of Joy, singing a mournful song on a broken harp. He saw Ned Stark, silent and stoic, gazing at Jon with an expression of deepest love tinged with sorrow. He saw a throne of swords, bathed in dragonfire, and the silhouettes of faceless figures warring over it. And through it all, he heard the distant cries of wolves. When he finally woke, the dawn was faint, the chamber dim, and a sense of heavy purpose weighed upon him. Rising, he dressed in dark leathers lined with fur, strapped Longclaw to his hip, and steeled himself for another day of delicate politics. Somewhere within these walls, Daenerys was likewise preparing to face the future. The Northern Lords and the Vale Knights would be stirring soon, readying themselves to see if the fragile alliance could hold. And beyond Winterfell, the realm waited in uneasy silence, watchers on all sides awaiting the slightest sign of weakness or conflict. Jon stepped into the corridor, the hush of early morning enveloping him. Servants carried candles to light the sconces, the faint smell of wax drifting in the chill air. He touched the hilt of Longclaw, comforted by its familiar weight. Today, he would take another step in forging a peace that might outlive him. He would do so for the North, for the Targaryen father he never knew, for the mother whose name he'd only whispered in recent times. Above all, he would do it for the family that had raised him, the people who had followed him, the vow he'd made to protect them at any cost. And so he walked on, a solitary figure in Winterfell's ancient halls, the light from the torches playing across his features. He was a Stark in heart, a Targaryen in blood, but still, he was simply Jon, forging forward through the snow and shadows, determined to shape a realm that might finally know something of lasting peace. The day stretched ahead, filled with challenges he could not predict, but he pressed on, the echo of his father's plea resonating in his mind. Protect what you love. And he would. Not just as a king or a Targaryen heir, but as a man who had bled and died and risen again to do what was right. It was enough to guide him, at least for one more morning, one more step on the uncertain road toward unity.